the president has made being a family man a central part of his political identity.
It's not Republicans, with all due respect, who made Hunter Biden into a complete scumbag on this and other issues. The ignoring his own daughter for 4 years, and the President of the United States hanging up a stocking for the dog, and not for his 7th grandchild.
Okay, look, we can also have sympathy for people who are struggling with addiction. Let's keep this conversation respectful.
Listen, I totally agree. And you know where I'm from? A lot of families deal with addiction. And you know who ends up picking up the pieces? The grandparents. And in this case, the grandparents would not acknowledge this little girl. It is offensive. But the bottom line is...
But they have now.
Oh, what a hero. The polling must have been brutal.
The polling
must have been brutal.
No one's ever questioned the heart and integrity of Joe Biden as a family man and as a human being.
Well, it should really come as no surprise. If you're going to talk about Joe Biden's problems and you're in the media, the main way you frame that is by talking about Republicans and their response to it. Yeah, that's pretty bad, but it's what they do. Joe Biden's issue with his own granddaughter, which sounds completely insane, is a really embarrassing issue. So the Republican reaction to it is the story CNN wants to talk about. And this panel gets kind of heated here. It's actually really funny because a Democratic strategist, Karen Finney, tries to even transition from this conversation back to the conversation about Kamala Harris being a no-good liar. And she'll highlight how Tim Scott and Will Hurd and John James and Tim Scott and all these other people are now helping Democrats advance a stupid narrative, even playing the whole, how dare you call Kamala Harris a liar, even though Kamala Harris is a no-good liar. But let's start with the clip. It starts off talking about how dare the Republicans bring up Joe Biden's terrible character issues.
So one thing that we heard some of the GOP candidates bring up in Iowa, President Biden is now acknowledging his 7th grandchild. There was a statement out on Friday night. Our son Hunter, they said, and Navy's mother London are working together to foster a relationship that is in the best interests of their daughter, preserving her privacy as much as possible going forward. This is not a political issue. It's a family matter. Jill and I only want what is best for our grandchildren, including Navy. So just for a little bit of context here, the president had come under scrutiny for only acknowledging his other grandchildren, his first 6 grandchildren. I shouldn't say first 6 grandchildren, but the others that the family has acknowledged who have the Biden last name. And his family ultimately decided to do this. And Michael LaRosa, you worked for Joe Biden for a long time. Can you help us understand this a little bit? Because I do think for many of the critics, certainly, and there was a Maureen Dowd column about this in the New York Times, this is a very innocent little girl who did nothing wrong, despite, what her father, Hunter Biden, may have been going through at the time.
Even that frames it like poor Joe Biden, poor Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden wasn't put through something. Hunter Biden chose to be a drug addict. He did. Sorry. We can twist this all we want and have all the conversations we want about it. That's a fact. And to pretend that his behavior is because he's a drug addict is just an excuse. It's a lie. His behavior is because he's a scumbag whose dad is a scumbag. But that framing aside.
Why now for the Bidens? And honestly, why did it take them so long?
Well, 2 things. First of all, I respect you as a journalist for having to ask the question, but it is a very gross and uncomfortable subject to talk about as it is.
Well, let's not call a little girl gross.
Okay? No. I'm talking about...
He's not calling a little girl gross. Let me defend this guy for just a second. He's not calling a little girl gross. He is suggesting that her even raising the issue is gross, because we like to throw that word around now. It means something powerful, and you shouldn't say these gross things. But it's not gross. The Biden team made the decision to finally acknowledge this girl's existence. That's a political matter. He did it because of political pressure. So again, attacking the critics here is what the media normally does. They'll get to that. But she's giving him a chance to say, okay, well, why are we doing this now? And he's like, well, we shouldn't be asking this question, which is garbage.
About the intersanctum of a family and the privacy of what goes on in a family. And you're right, that little girl, she should not be weaponized by the Republicans who are down there in Arkansas with conservative lawyers and conservative PR people and posting on their Instagram. They shouldn't be weaponizing her. And everybody's welcome to make their own personal judgments on the Biden, but it is frankly, they are a family, a real family with real feelings, with real struggles and challenges, like every family. And I guarantee you that the more that the Republicans make this an issue, it will not work. Voters appreciate, voters relate to having struggles in their own families. They root for people with vulnerabilities. They root for people who understand and relate to them. And, ultimately, the Bidens are a real family just like everyone else.
You root for the kid. You don't root for the people being pricks to a kid. This is crazy. Yes. It's actually a brilliant scheme by Democrats, you see. If Republicans criticize Joe Biden for being a terrible person to his granddaughter, that actually helps Joe Biden because people like it when you're a terrible person to your granddaughter. Isn't that obvious? Maybe Democrats do. Weird flex, I guess.
Sure. But Scott Jennings...
By the way, Scott Jennings' face is like, I can't believe this layup is being given to me.
The president has made being a family man a central part of his political identity.
It's not Republicans, with all due respect, who made Hunter Biden into a complete scumbag on this and other issues. The ignoring his own daughter for 4 years and the President of the United States hanging up a stocking for the dog and not for his 7th grandchild.
Okay, look, we can also have sympathy for people who are struggling with addiction. Let's.
It has nothing to do with that. They didn't ignore the granddaughter because Hunter Biden's a scumbag, as this guy says. It's so ridiculous. Scott Jennings. It is so ridiculous to frame it that way. Like, are we not allowed to criticize Hunter Biden because he used to be a drug addict? If that's the case, we need to let a lot of people out of jail.
Keep this conversation respectful.
Listen, I totally agree. And you know where I'm from, a lot of families deal with addiction. And you know who ends up picking up the pieces? The grandparents. And in this case, the grandparents would not acknowledge this little girl. It is offensive. But the bottom line is...
But they have now.
They have now. Big win for the Bidens here.
What a hero. The polling must have been brutal.
Just
the polling must have been brutal.
No one ever questioned the heart and integrity of Joe Biden as a family man.
I do. I actually question the heart and integrity of Joe Biden as a family man, as a decent man, as a good person, as a non-scumbag, as a truth teller. Yeah, I question a lot about Joe Biden. See, this is why this question is relevant, is because that's the brand they've tried to create. Mr. Family Man, when it's all a lie.
And as a human being, and the pain and suffering and loss that man has been through, including the struggles he deals with.
30 seconds, Karen.
I think it is far more appalling to see Republicans this week, starting with you, Scott, calling the Vice President of the United States a liar when it comes to the very real personal stories. I don't need, some, academic to tell me about the horrors of slavery. It's in my own family.
What? Why is she talking about slavery here? So she's trying to deflect from the Bidens by going to Kamala Harris making up stuff about slavery. And this is somehow a pivot that she likes. It's an interesting one. Doesn't make much sense to me. And it's worse to call Kamala Harris a liar than to not recognize your own granddaughter. But Joe Biden's a family man, right? Okay, sure.
I know from my own family stories, you now have black conservatives who agree with her. Are they liars too? I think that...
Yes, they followed into the trap. Maybe they're not liars, but they're doing what they're doing for political purposes. They're wrong. It might very well be a lie. I mean, they are saying things that aren't true. You're hearing things about it being a net benefit. DeSantis nor the Sanders ever said that. It being positive. None of that was ever said. So yeah, actually, in a lot of ways, those people are aligned. So yeah, good question.
That conversation is far more troubling than an addict and a bad family situation.
Let me put a pause on this. Last word here, and then we're going to go to break.
It's a nice attempt at a pivot, but it's not about Biden's addiction. This is about Joe Biden not recognizing his granddaughter for 4 years. The statement might be well worded, but it's inexcusable. It took him 4 years to acknowledge the child of God. It was conceived regardless of the circumstances of that conception. It's a child of God you wouldn't recognize for 4 years.
I understand why you'd rather talk about that than talk about the fact that your party is demonizing people who want to tell the truth about racism while you're trying to reach out to African American
Okay, we're going to keep this. We're going
It has nothing to do with what's going on. Look how smug her face is. Why is she smug? They weren't even discussing that. She's the one trying to change the subject and make this about anything else. And no surprise. What's she going to do? Make an actual point that Joe Biden's not a scumbag? No, she can't do that. So she goes on and she moves from the lie that Joe Biden's a good person to the lie that Republicans, I guess, think slavery was good for black people. No one said it. It's not even remotely true. They don't care. They're going to keep saying it. That's all it is. And Tim Scott and all these other guys, they've played right into their hands, as Scott Jennings has said on CNN before. Just a complete embarrassment all the way around. But Karen Finney's attempt to pivot there is exactly why you know that this granddaughter thing was done. It was hurting them. So now they want to talk about anything else. Joe Biden is not a good person. That's the moral of the story. I will repeat it as often as possible. He is a liar. He is a scumbag. He is a grifter. He is corrupt. And, like the National Review article called him earlier this week, he's an asshole.